So I'm Laura, I'm from Club Soda. For those of you who don't know, we're a mindful drinking movement. We've been going for 6 years now. Before there was any low and no alcohol drinks on the market, and so we'd started to do some work around talking to pubs and bars about what would help them treat their non-drinking customers a little bit better. And then low and no suddenly began to boom, and so we did the Mindful Drinking Festival. We have a guide to mindful drinking and all of the drinks that are available, which we're about to relaunch. And we do lots of other bits and pieces, including education for venues in the low and no space, of which I can tell you a lot more about probably as we go along. But the most important thing for, I guess, me in terms of helping supercharge the low and no space is continuing to make the case on why venues might want to stock more low and no and why it should be a big part of their mix. So we've got 3 amazing guests here today. So we've got Vaughan, who runs the Virgin Mary Bar in Dublin, so making money from a totally alcohol-free bar, and he might just touch on some international expansion that's happening shortly. Then we've got Christine. Some of you may have seen Christine. She's been in the industry for a very long time, but was also responsible for the Orchard list, which was the low and no list at Hakkasan. And then we've got Dan from the Hedonist in Leeds. And Dan fills a very important role in this discussion as well, which is that you do a load of 1-unit cocktails as part of your menu. So it's always important to know that this is about low as well as no, although it's obviously you would have noticed that the alcohol-free space probably is far more dominant right now. Now, as we're a small select crowd, I'd like to encourage you to ask questions as we go along. Just put your hands up. It's important for me that you go away with what the information that you need from this session, and your questions will also help anybody watching the video afterwards. But I was going to start, I'm going to start with you, Vaughan. Why would you, particularly in Ireland, particularly in Dublin, why would you even begin to think that it was possible to create an alcohol-free bar and make it successful?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people laughed at that concept of creating a non-alcohol bar in Dublin. I live there, so that was one of the reasons I started it in Dublin. But also I realized that Dublin is one of the drinking capitals of Europe, and you know, people like to party there, and if it works in Dublin, it's going to work in other cities. So the reason I suppose I set up was, I thought about it in 2018, I was thinking that there were more people who were aware of what they were putting into their bodies. There were more people looking at the backs of labels, not only for sugar content, but to see what was actually in products. And then I noticed as well that there was these products coming out, the likes of Seedlip, sparkling tea, these products that were coming out and beginning to evolve. Beers were doing especially well. And then I just really looked at it and thought, you know, are there enough products for me to have a back bar and to actually open a non-alcohol bar? And by the time I opened, a year later, there was. but when I first started, I just thought it was an interesting concept, and people looked at it, and when 2019, when we opened, you know, a lot of people were just going, "You're going to be shut in a week. You know, we're going to burn the place down." Those are the kind of messages we got, and you know, we're here 2 and a bit years later, and we are still surviving, and we're going to open another bar. So,
tell us where you're opening your bar.
I'm opening a bar in Abu Dhabi next month. It's been a long time coming, but they keep sending me pictures, so it's on site. And so yeah, we're opening a bar in Abu Dhabi, and we're going to have 84 covers. We're going to have food and non-alcohol, and we're going to really push pairing food and non-alcohol together, and really try and bring a different culture into drinking high-class cocktails, really complex cocktails and drinks that we make, and pairing that with food. And it's a culture that predominantly doesn't drink, but really what we're looking to do is bring a different style of drink to the GCC region, because there mocktails are predominant and people drink these sugary sweet drinks. We're really looking at complex, you know, balanced cocktails like you would get in any high-class cocktail bar.
But I get the idea that low and no is a trend, or alcohol-free is a trend. But there's a big jump between knowing that it's a trend and going, right, I'm going to open a full-time bar and mean it can make money. I mean, how do you even begin to scope what the potential income from that is? Why didn't you just go for a hybrid bar that had a lot of alcohol-free as well alongside alcohol? Why not just do that? Isn't that easier?
It probably is easier, but it dilutes your concept. I think for people, we could have been a coffee shop as well, but when we don't sell tea or coffee. We sell nitro coffee, what we put into our Genius, which is a kind of stout-based drink. But really what we said was, no, let's be focused on being an non-alcohol bar, because then people will get it. If we're kind of a hybrid, we're not that different to a lot of the bars that are down the street or throughout Dublin anyway. I don't know how many venues there are in Dublin, but they're all alcohol, and some of them serve a very small amount of non-alcohol now, but at the time, hardly any did. But we just thought we needed to make the concept simple, easy to understand. We are a non-alcohol bar. You come to our bar, you have all the environment, the music, the crack of a bar, but simply with a small ingredient just taken out.
Cool. We'll come back a bit more about how you get bums on seats shortly.
Yep.
We'll let you have a sip of your cocktail. But Christine, when you were working at Hakkasan, they've been around a long, long time. Restaurants generally do have something alcohol-free for those weirdos who don't want wine with their meal. Why did you embark on what is really quite a transformative and long process to develop a very specific alcohol-free menu? Why even bother?
Well, it stopped being the weirdos that wanted the alcohol-free stuff. We realised that wine sales were going down, and when we looked closely at it, it wasn't that people didn't want to spend the money. They were actually buying more expensive wines, but they weren't drinking much of them. And when we dug a bit deeper, we realised people just didn't want to drink as much alcohol. So we thought, okay, we need to have to beef up our offering of no and low. And then we realised that our existing offering, which was effectively mocktails, they weren't drinks I wanted to drink. They were sweet, calorific, fruity, based on juice generally. They were very good, they'd been created by our bartenders, but they weren't working for people who were going to have one glass of an expensive wine and then wanted to have another glass of something without alcohol. Going on to a sweet cocktail just wasn't going to work for them. So that was the logic behind it. And what we set out to do was to try and make it seamless so that people who were drinking both alcohol and drinks without alcohol could simply pick a mix and choose what they wanted, and the quality and the flavour profiles and the service and presentation of everything would be as one. It was all the right standard for the restaurant.
But when you went to look to put together that list, you didn't just look through the Matthew Clark catalogue, did you, and go, what's in low and no? You went a bit mental.
Yeah, well, somebody gave me a big budget, you see, which is probably always a mistake. We did lots of things, so I was able to take on my now colleague James Morgan as a full-time researcher on the project. Hakkasan Group had restaurants around the world, so I was able to get all of those restaurants to research their local markets, supermarkets, what their staff drank, and package them up and send them over to us. We worked with laboratories. We actually set up a test kitchen for 6 months where we developed some drinks of our own. We developed our own kombucha recipe, honey gin recipe. We did trials with cold brew tea. We even developed a drink which I think was probably about a decade ahead of its time and failed because of that, which was a non-alcoholic drink which in a sense deconstructed sake. It was made of the ingredients of sake. It never had alcohol, but it tasted like wonderful sake. And we had a bottle designed and a label designed, so we did go into it in quite a big way.
And I think there's something very important about that, which is that I still think restaurants are behind, our research shows actually that restaurants are behind pubs and bars in terms of their low and no offer. And some of that is because they don't think there's an alcohol-free wine, and therefore they go nowhere. Whereas actually what you said is that it's the alternatives you provided that were just as good as everything else, not that they were an alcohol-free wine.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one thing that restaurants have to do is for the sommelier team and the bar team to collaborate, because it's not just wine drinkers wanting something without alcohol. It's not just people wanting a cocktail that's more like a martini than like a breakfast juice. It's all of that. And a lot of the interesting drinks kind of fall halfway between the two, and there's a lot that can be developed in-house, and there's a lot now that you can buy in. You don't need to spend the big money that I managed to spend, but what you do need to do is make it convincing. If you've got a really good wine list or a really good cocktail list, you need a really good selection of no and low drinks, because if you just have a token one or two, it's exactly what Vaughan said. People won't get it. They don't believe you if, there's the non-alcoholic selection. It has to look as if you care about it as much, and you have to care about it as much.
And I guess it has to fit your brand, so all of your alcohol-free had to be just as good, and so on. So it's about brand fit. There's no point being a craft beer bar and then putting some, a Budweiser Zero on if you wouldn't put a normal Budweiser behind your bar. It has to fit.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to. I mean, I think the good thing now, as opposed to 6 years ago when I started doing this, is that there's a lot that you can buy, that you can get delivered in, that will fit pretty much any type of restaurant. You can choose some products, but you have got to make the effort to do that, because it isn't going to be the same suppliers as all of your existing drinks come from. You might well need to take on one more supplier.
And the other interesting thing you pointed out was the fact that it's people who are drinking but are either swapping drinks around or not drinking that particular night.
Yeah.
And Dan, you do something very particular around cocktails. So cocktails your thing, you're a cocktail bar, but you've got some one-unit cocktails. Tell us about those and why you even bothered to develop some low ABV cocktails.
So a couple of years ago we were trying to get more of a commercial thing as well as obviously a mindful drinking thing. So with the low and no booming is great. And what we wanted to try and do at the bar was create a way for people to consume cocktails, but in a way that they do and understand, like count steps. Like in the modern world, we count everything. We count calories, we count steps. How do we count alcohol? There's the whole phrase, low to no, that's getting pushed around. Everyone's loving it, it's great. And I agree, it's not a trend. I do think it's a generational shift in the way we consume as humans. But for us, there was no real way to quantify that. If I went to anyone in this audience now, what's a low to no drink? What's low alcohol? What's a low alcohol drink? 1.2%.
She knows. She knows. She knows the law.
Consumers will go maybe 12%. Some might go 15%. Okay, so if you drink a cocktail with 50 mils of 37% alcohol in it, what does that mean from a consumption point of view? No one knows. So we want to create a menu and create drinks where we focused around the unit, because 1 unit of alcohol is obviously public health England measurement of how we consume alcohol, and obviously we are recommending that units a week. So we wanted to do that with our drinks, so people could count how many units of alcohol they were consuming per drink. So if you had 2 cocktails, you had 2 units. So you can control your consumption, but also still really enjoy the cocktails and liquid and the environment, very similar to Vaughan, his place in Dublin, but know that you're not consuming too much alcohol. One of the reasons I want to do that as well is drinking cultures in many of the UK cities are a lot different to London, for example. London, you can go out of the week, probably Dublin as well, it's a major international city, and it'll be busy from a trade point of view. The smaller cities or more localised cities like Leeds, Manchester, Glasgow, now Liverpool, it's not weekday trade, we are weekend cities. We will do 7% of our turnover on the weekend. So how we want to try and also get consumers in during the week, because consumers instantly think alcohol, I'm going to get drunk, I'm going to get hungover the next day, I don't want to do anything silly, so they won't during the week because they've got work next day. But if you create a menu or you integrate drinks into the menu that they can count 1 unit, I know I'm not going to go over after 1 unit of alcohol. So I still come for a drink and I still enjoy the after-work environment that we create.
And are these cocktails as fancy pants as all the rest of your cocktails? Have you put just as much work into them? Or is it just some orange juice mixed with some cranberry juice?
Yeah, to be honest, it's more challenging for our team because we can't reverse engineer the drink. So we start with 1 unit to start with. You need to create everything that you will with a normal cocktail, but you've got these parameters, these guidelines that can't come out. And it really challenges the team as well. And one thing that we do with the drinks is we don't instantly go to the no to low products or the low alcohol products like the vermouths and the teas, things like that. We try and encourage people to use full strength alcohol, but just in small doses.
And in terms of, I like this idea that you've identified that weekday consumers are very different to weekend, and I guess lunchtime consumers are the same. That idea that you can use your drink menu to get in customers is quite important, in the same way as changing your lunch food menu to your dinner menu might be something you do in venue. Do you think that that venue should look a little bit more about the shifting times of day for menus? And do you alternate your menu at all between day and evening, or?
Give them credibility when people drinks. I think it's more about pushing it on social media, pushing it out, and letting the staff know as well. Get the staff to recommend these drinks as normal drinks, just letting them have the added value, the added USP that it is a
Okay, so I might come back to that bit about staff training, because I think that's very vital. But you also talked about integrating it on your menu. And I often think low's a little bit more challenging to tell people about. So how do you present it on your menu, and how do you use your menu to educate the consumer?
Menu, we have a little descriptor. So every one of these drinks is 1 unit of alcohol. We've created a little blue cocktail shaker, symbol. So any drink that's got a little blue cocktail shaker next to it signifies 1 unit. Very much like you would get a VG or a V. It's one thing we really want to try and push as a venue, as kind of movement, getting this little blue cocktail shaker everywhere. And blue just seems to be becoming the colour of no and low.
Is it? Yeah. Quick, write that down, Lucy, write it down. Blue is the colour of low and no.
You're dressed right.
Christine, how did Hakkasan integrate into the menu, and what did you learn from that experience of positioning it and navigating before the staff even spoke to a customer, navigating the customer to low and no, because it can often be really difficult?
Well, we actually went in a different direction initially. We created the orchard list as a separate list. So, you know, when you sit down in Hakkasan, you're given a wine list and you're given a cocktail list, but you were also given an orchard list. So it had its own authority. It wasn't an addendum to one of the others. It was, you know, you might want to look at this one. And we obviously spent money, and it gave us room to talk a lot more about the categories and the unusual drinks we found, because some of them were very unusual, and, you know, the provenance of them. We ran that for 4 months, and then we started to incorporate the drinks into the existing drinks lists. But not... We did a couple of things. In some sites, we tried putting them in as a separate page, but near the beginning. You know, in other sites, we tried spreading the drinks through, for instance, the bar list and the wine list. We didn't come out with a sort of a prescription as to what works best. But I think it's really important that you don't just put them at the back of your drinks list or your wines list. You know, they must not be an afterthought. They must be a key component of your offering, and something that is part of your brand and that you're proud of. So however you do that, I think there's flexibility, but that's important.
I like the idea that you experiment with where to put them, and you don't assume that because you've put them on the end of the list and no one's buying them, that that's because nobody wants them, but that you actually spend some time thinking about what works in your venue. I think that's, this is a new thing, so it needs some new treatment, really. Vaughan, your customers must be overwhelmed by choice, right? You've got the other issue, which is it's all alcohol-free. Oh, I can have everything.
You can, yeah. And actually, last week, we doubled the size of our menu. So literally, we went from, having 7 to 10 cocktails. We went to having, 14 plus, because we have specials as well. And then we brought in a load more beers. Our menus, we actually printed the wrong size of menu holder when we first started. They were too tall for what we needed. There wasn't enough drinks for it. And it was just a mistake that our graphic designer did. And actually, we're now using them because we've got the taller menus, and we've got a really comprehensive menu now. It's 3 pages of non-alcohol drinks. And I think when people come to the bar now, they're really beginning to see how we're evolving as a bar, because we started off with, we started off as an alcohol-free bar, so people would get it. But now we're moving from alcohol-free to well-being. So well-being is part of our DNA. We are really looking to, the types of drinks that are coming out there now that producers are giving to us or supplying are really interesting. And this whole well-being concept, we see that, really exploding. We're probably a bit early, as we were as an alcohol-free bar. When we first opened 2 years ago, I thought we were maybe a bit early, but we went with it and took the risk. But I think that in 2 years' time, there will be a significant wave and change in terms of people's approach to going to alcohol-free venues, or simply, as you guys are saying, swapping out. We see a lot of swapping out at the moment, where people are, like, we've just put Guinness 0.0 on tap in the bar, and people are coming to our bar down the street, having had 2 Guinnesses up the road, coming for a Guinness 0.0, swapping out, maybe staying for another one, and then going on and having another one. So with big brands, they can swap out, and with cocktails, they swap out. They go and have cocktails somewhere else, they come and take a break in our bar, and then they move on to the next venue.
I'm really interested in that well-being piece, because obviously if you're in low and no, that's part of why you've probably created a product. But bars and restaurants, probably restaurants a bit, but bars in particular, have never had to talk about sugar, calories, ABV of drink. That's not things that you're taught as a bartender.
Liver cancer.
So So how do you begin to get your staff to talk about those things? Because definitely COVID has supercharged people's thoughts around their well-being. How do you train your staff to talk about that and not take the piss out of customers? I'm assuming you won't take the piss out of customers anyway, but some venues do.
It's all about giving them the core kind of knowledge of what that is first. So what is sugar? What is alcohol? What is calories? And kind of giving them the knowledge to talk about it confidently. We then do kind of a 3-stage process with a single sentence, 2 sentences, 3 sentences. So for someone who just if it's a single quick service, it's a single 1 sentence, and this is what it is, and this is how we deal with it as a business and as on a menu. If they're a bit more interested, double sentence. If they're really interested, which more people are, 100% don't agree more than that. People now want to know so much about what they're consuming in their liquids as much as their food. I always say we're usually about 5 to 7 years behind the food industry in terms of consumer habits. And now alcohol is our version of sugar with its negativity. But yeah, it's giving them the tools that actually engage with the customer. And again, like any type of venue, make them feel welcome and again, not stupid.
So I like that idea that you've got some really easy, snappy answers for your bar staff to talk to people about. Christine, I know that you found training a little bit challenging, actually, which shows us that there's still a lot more to do. Tell us how that experience went for you.
Well, it was really odd because we were really well known for our training. We were kind of doing class-leading training for wine, for spirits, for bar, for sake. And we kind of thought that we would just do it for non-alcoholic drinks as well. So we put together what we thought was a very good training program. We put all of our customer-facing staff through it. And then sat back and watched as they didn't sell the drinks, and they sold them, put them in their own glasses and things like that, and we just couldn't figure out what was going on. And I think it was partly because we were early adopters, and there's a traditional point of view of people in restaurants that, you know, if you sell a soft drink, or you've only sold a soft drink, you've got to try and sell a bottle of wine, you've got to try and sell a cocktail. And I think our staff somehow felt guilty if they sold a non-alcoholic drink, you know, that they hadn't sold the right thing. So, I mean, that was, you know, it was over 5 years ago. I think it would be different now, I hope so, but I also think I would approach the training a bit differently now, and spend a lot more time explaining how the drinks fitted into our drinks offering and why they were there, and, you know, that they were going to be profitable, and that people were going to appreciate having them, and the health benefits and everything. So I think we focused on kind of the product training without quite realizing that our service staff just felt uncomfortable around them.
It's amazing. We're a very alcohol-centric country, and you don't realise how much that is completely embedded in how we do things until you try and do what you did, Christine, in terms of get people to realise that selling something alcohol-free is a good thing in a venue, not a bad thing. And I speak to venues all the time that still struggle with this. They're used to having targets to upsell a more expensive beer from a cheaper beer, but never any targets to upsell from a tap water to something that people pay for example. So we have to remember that there's this massive social conditioning that we need to remember that's there, and we need to reassure staff that this is what's wanted. Vaughan, everybody in your venue is trained, but I mean, sugar and calories is probably the most popular in alcohol-free drinks, probably the most popular blog on our website. Does it come up a lot with your guys?
Yeah, we get asked, you know, how many calories in certain products, or, you know, generally don't get asked that much about sugar. You know, it is strange because when people come into the bar, the kind of questions they want to know are our beers gluten-free, you know. I suppose we kind of have a rule to say that roughly the beers that we serve are half the calories of the alcohol equivalents. Some of our products even have calories in big letters, like our water kefirs. They've got calories, 7 calories on each of those bottles. They clearly communicate the calorie count on the product. But I think really the job that we've got to do is educate, and I still think that's our main thing. Whether it's training staff, educating consumers is what you really need to do at the end of the day, because I think that when consumers come into, you know, they say 70 to 80% of any consumer that walks into a bar doesn't really know what they want to drink at the point of walking into the bar. So I think with our bar, it's maybe you know, maybe 10% know what they want to drink. We never get brand calls. You know, people come in and they are just open to this idea of this crazy kind of non-alcohol concept.
People think that alcohol-free drinks are just a posher version of a soft drink, and therefore are very full of sugar. And I have to spend a lot of time telling people that most of them are sugar-free or lower in sugar. They're designed for you. They're not designed for kids. So
exactly. And our whole focus is to make sure that, you know, we are about well-being, and we're not putting overly sweet drinks in there. We are very, very careful about looking at the ingredients of everything that kind of we select to go in our cocktail list. I think it's really important, and you know, I think that if you can have this concept of a bar that you can walk into and come out healthier than when you stepped in, that's a pretty mind-blowing concept for people to kind of get their heads around. And then some people say to me, well, people don't go out to be healthy, but I think actually, you know, people don't really go out to damage their body either. But so I think there's a really kind of interesting, I suppose, there's a really interesting zeitgeist happening at the moment where people are really looking at alcohol and saying, is this why I'm having a good time? Or am I having a good time anyway, whether it's there or not?
Yeah, when I first started Club Soda, the number one reason for people joining was to lose weight. Now the number one reason is mental health. So that just shows that people's shift in what's a good night and being present is a big part of that. Has anyone got any questions? Cool. I'm going to wipe the microphone afterwards, apparently, but last question.
How have you found the challenge between the cost of an alcoholic cocktail or beer to a non-alcoholic one? Because a lot of the things I hear is, why am I paying the same amount of money when it's got no alcohol in it? How do you get the message across? It's about the experience, the flavour, the complexity of your cocktails or beers. How do you educate the customer? Or how do you get that message across? Because that's a challenge that we face.
Who wants to do it? Me?
I'll go first. Yeah.
You go.
Go, Vaughan.
Okay, so I have this theory that when people go for a night out, they don't really look at the cost of the drinks that they're drinking.
Yeah.
Or maybe they do when they're choosing wines. But, you know, if they go out and they're just drinking beer or drinking cocktails, they just go out and they buy what they want, and then occasionally they look at the bill and go, well, you know, they don't really think about what they're going to spend their money on. We get asked that question a lot. And they'll say, you know, why are non-alcohol products so expensive? I would just go back to the people and say, well, actually, if you've tried to create drinks without alcohol, it's a lot more difficult to create those drinks than it is with. And then the other thing is, these brands generally, unless it's a Heineken or a Guinness, they're not producing at the same volume as established brands out there. So we're used to big brands producing cheap liquor that we can drink at a good price. And because they create such volume, they don't need to necessarily sell it at a high price point. But a lot of these people that are pioneering non-alcohol, they're really not producing large volumes. They're having a much more complicated process. You know, if you're putting alcohol into your drink, or into your product, it's a flavor amplifier. It makes making a drink very easy, or creating flavors and passing those flavors on very easily. When you're doing it without alcohol, and when it comes down to training bar stuff, it's the same answer. You know, you've got to create complicated drinks without alcohol. You know, so the answer to the question is, they're producing less volume, and it's a much more complicated process. So their price point is only reflecting what margins they're going to try and create.
I do find that once you explain that, people go, yeah, fair enough. And it's not like they're going to have a fight about it. But there's something about how we know a lot more about taxation in this country than we think they do. And everyone goes, but it hasn't got tax. And actually in a bar, that's a very small proportion of the final drink anyway. So I think we do need to get that point across. People do save money in other ways, like no cabs home, no kebab, all those sorts of things. But yes, it's still something that as an industry, it needs to be addressed. How do you deal with that with your one unit cocktails?
We've probably got an easier road with that, because our price point's usually about £1 to £2 less than our normal cocktails, so we don't really get questioned it. The one thing on that though, which I actually quite like, and if there's any producers here, I think obviously the spirit industry is built this entire sales techniques and provenance, and the technique and how they make stuff and X, Y, and Z, and also their heritage. The Loads No Man doesn't have that. But also, a lot of the brands that I find, I don't know how you find this, aren't very open with their production techniques and how they actually create their products. And if they did that, it would make our job, all our jobs, a lot easier to actually speak to the customer and go, well, this is how it's made, and explain the complicated process that it is. The reverse engineering output is very complicated, but they're not very open with it. That's more of a little thing for me.
It's an interesting challenge.
I 100% agree with that, you know, because part of the process of talking about a drink on a restaurant floor in a bar is talking about the components of it and how it was made, or its provenance, or who made it, or whatever. You know, we all know that people are really interested in the family that have been making wine on that hillside for 400 years and that kind of stuff. And I'm totally fed up with every de-alcoholized wine product you find. The producer says, oh, we have a unique method, a unique, gentle, cold method. Like, yeah. and you know, they need to actually man up a bit and find vocabulary to talk about how these drinks are made in a positive way. And if you want an example of what I mean, if you go to the alcohol world, Jack Daniels is really famous, you know, for their amazing advertisements where over the years they have taught the consumer so much about how their product is made, and yet it's all been fabulously entertaining and interesting and appealing. And I think there's a huge lack of that. So again, if there's any producers here, get your house in order for that. But in terms of price, which I know was the question, I think there can be an argument for taking a slightly lower profit when you launch the products, you know, to help them bed in. But I have to agree with Vaughan. People aren't worried about spending the money on them, but they, and to a much larger extent your staff, just want to know that nobody's being ripped off. So, you know, there has to be some honesty and some justification. And I honestly, I wish I had £1 for everyone who'd asked me, why does non-alcoholic wine cost more money than real wine, because there's no duty on it? And I always have to say, well, look, you know, they have to make the real wine first, and then they have to take about 14% of it away, you know. So, yeah, it does cost a bit more. But, yeah, it's training and producers.
And working together to get the messages out, I think, as well. Is there any more questions? Cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really about the growth of the space. And are you seeing the growth in the kind of the no and low space coming from traditional alcohol drinkers or people kind of gearing up from water? And how do you see that kind of continuing?
We've seen our sales mix from Project Cocktails, especially after lockdown, get a lot higher. So before lockdown, we were probably sitting around about 10-15% now. Now we're in the kind of 30, which is really good. And also we do a lot of activations for the brands as well. One at the weekend we saw a complete mocktail bar at a festival, and it was doing really well. And when we put mocktails,
Alcohol-free cocktail. Have you learned nothing?
We're seeing it for a younger demographic. So we're seeing kind of like 19 to 30, roughly, is where we're kind of getting most of the sales going forward, especially on the weekend.
Definitely, our research shows that it's moderation that's the biggest boom, and there's still a lot of way to go in this space. The chatter online is far greater than the actual sales, and I think if we were to match the online chatter, that's a £5 billion market before we've even started to supercharge beyond that. So there's still lots of room for growth here, lots of discussion happening online, lots of new people to reach, and that's definitely a moderation market as well. Has anyone else got any thoughts to add into that?
I think the category is going to continue to grow, and I think it's going to grow. I think it's going to grow much quicker as we educate more people, as there's more options out there. There's better tasting products out there than there was a year ago. Attitudes I'm seeing are completely changing to when I opened 2 years ago. Now, when I go onto radio shows or TV shows, it's really interesting because the presenter approaches me with a view that he or she thinks the public will have. So they're very kind of laughing at the concept. And then when we have the phone-ins now, at the end of the show or during the show, they are really surprised by people's attitude to non-alcohol or low alcohol. And they then begin to turn the presenter who thinks that they've got hold of the zeitgeist of what's happening out there for their audience, but actually their audience are saying, no, I want this in my city, I want to be able to go out, have a great night out without alcohol.
Yeah. Very briefly, I was speaking to a bunch of wine educators the other day, and one of them had done some work on some research, and they made an amazing point, which is there is a generation of people entering alcohol drinking age, and that within that is a demographic of people who will never drink wine. And that is something, you know, it's mainly moderators at the moment, but there is a whole generation coming up for whom a lot of them will never drink alcohol.
It's because they've been put to bed by my age who stink of Chardonnay every night. That's probably why that is.
Yeah.
So this is definitely a growth category. There's definitely a lot more to come.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot more education to do within venues, menu placement, educating staff. There's a lot for us to all pull together on, and I desperately want to make sure that happens. We're about to launch our training for venues in a couple of weeks that will be available for the brands to use with venues, and we hope that will be an interesting start, and we'll be able to see how that begins to work. And we also have lots of research now on our website. If anyone's interested to go and have a look at joinclubsoda.com. This is an ongoing discussion. We'd really like to hear from any of you about your thoughts, what you think the barriers are, so that we can all work together on reducing them and helping this category grow, which is what this session's been all about and what we hope that you're passionate about as well. And then finally, if you want to join me and Christine, we now have an alcohol-free wine club, which has been great fun for us anyway. I'm not sure about anyone else, but we're enjoying it, right? Where we're beginning to at least showcase what's happening in this category, because there's a lot more happening in the wine and wine occasion space. I suspect everyone will be hanging around just here if you've got any more questions afterwards. But otherwise, thank you so much, guys. That's been really helpful, and I hope you've all enjoyed it too.